Hi, this is Sablin Bhartia and welcome to TFiR Newsroom. And today we have with us Michael Cade, Senior Technologist at Kasten by Veeam. Michael, first of all, it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, nice to be here.
Today we are going to talk about the release of Kubestr, which is an open source project. But before we go there, we have covered Kasten and we have also covered Veeam before. But after this, those two companies together, Kasten by Veeam, I want to understand quickly the focus of the companies so that we do know a bit about where we are coming from when we talk about this release of open source project.
Yeah, so I guess the high level view of Kasten is obviously focusing around data management in a Kubernetes cloud native environment. That's our first and foremost. That's the business side of what we're doing. But underpinning that is a huge focus and a strategy around open source technology, open source projects that we innovate with, but also what we contribute to as well. So yeah, as much as there's the commercial aspect to this, that we have a backup product, the ability to do good stuff with data in a native way, there's also that community drive there that enables our customers, our prospects, the community to do more with our tools that we see as a fit out there.
Right, because whenever acquisitions happen, the community they get worried that, hey, you know what if your focus will change? So this release is actually I see it as a commitment to open source, which is going to remain there. Nothing is going to change when it comes to your approach towards open source, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been in so some of the underpinning technology that we have at Kasten with our K10 product is built upon an open source project called Copia. We've built our own in the past around an application framework called Canister. And obviously that's continuing, that's part of the building block of the K10 platform. Now, Kubestr is a little bit different in that, so absolutely what you say is correct, but it doesn't really focus on the backup. It doesn't focus on the data management. It focuses on more aligned to storage and a few things around the storage ecosystem of Kubernetes.
And that's where we are heading. Tell me about Kubestr. What problem is it solving? Why you released it at this point?
So there's three elements to Kubestr that this helps address. So obviously from an open source point of view, we want to get something that's working out of the door and available to the community, because that's where true innovation happens, right? And with the community, with different contributors. So the first and foremost goal of Kubestr is to identify the storage options that you have within your Kubernetes cluster. Now, this isn't a day zero. It isn't just a day zero tool. Yes, it's great that we can go in there and we can do some of the stuff that I'll mention, but it could be if you've been running Kubernetes and you've got clusters, potentially multiple, and you just want to know whether you've got access to storage that maybe was there on day zero, but you haven't maybe leveraged that. And this is more akin to if you've gone into the public cloud and you've deployed public cloud storage and you're leveraging that as your Kubernetes production storage, but you're not necessarily using it all. What Kubestr will do is identify that storage and at least give you some understanding, so visibility into that storage that you're potentially wasting, and you're obviously paying money for that. So that's the first and foremost aspect of Kubestr. So identification of that storage. Then we go into, well, let's validate that storage is configured correctly. So over the last 12 to 18 months, we've seen a huge uptick around the CSI driver. In-tree provisioners have not gone away. They're still very much there. But obviously the storage landscape within Kubernetes has become, let's call it a little overwhelming, in that there's a lot of choice, which is only a good thing. And it's great that we have choice to put our applications, put our stateful workloads in various different places. But we also want to make sure that we're configuring everything to the best of its ability. One of the key things there is with the CSI driver, you've got the capability around snapshots. So one of the things that we'll validate using Kubestr, and remember that this is all automated as well. This is This is not taking anything that couldn't be done manually before, but people in this world don't have time to go and create the manual steps to be able to do this validation test. So this is hitting the easy button. This is very much a handy little tool that will allow you to validate that your storage is configured correctly. So what we do from a validation point of view is we'll create a pod, an application, a lightweight operating system. We'll create a persistent volume claim, a persistent volume, and then we'll snapshot that volume using the CSI driver, and then we'll restore the data from that. Just a simple test to ensure that your CSI driver is configured correctly. So that's the middle part, that's the validation. But then going one step further is, I've mentioned about us having lots of different choice around various different storage, whether it's managed, unmanaged, various different storage types available, both on premises, both in the cloud. More so in the cloud, it becomes quite overwhelming. And then also in the cloud, you've got the added challenge of, well, that compute node can also determine what your storage looks like as well. So it definitely changes what that ceiling looks like and how that looks. Now, benchmarking has been a thing from a storage perspective for many years. It's not a new concept by any stretch. And there are people out there today that are absolutely validating or evaluating their Kubernetes storage by using a traditional tool. That whole manual approach, though, which again, we don't have time because, well, there's a lot of things that we're having to think about in a Kubernetes cluster. So what the Kubestr element here does is evaluate against your storage using FIO. So again, it's a built-in automated way of being able to run a test, a performance test against your storage to give you an understanding of, well, what IOPS are achievable out of that system, what read and random read, sequential read, like bring your own FIO type configuration and run that against that storage. All of that together, you get those three elements in a very quick and easy, like less than a minute type thing to give you that visibility of what your storage landscape looks like within Kubernetes.
So if I look at Kubestr, is it a tool itself? Is it a collection of tools? Because if you look at the cloud native landscape, especially, there are so many open source projects already, and you already mentioned it. And I think the way things are happening is that things become very complicated very quickly. And when it comes to storage options, the same thing is there. So let's look at Kubestr from the point of view of making it easier for DevOps, engineer, developers, or SREs to look at storage from a perspective where you are making things easier. And the second part of the question that I will do a follow-up, which will be more about once again, we always look at buy versus build, where you can very easily go and start using an open source project, but there too becomes a big challenge. So let's just start with the first piece of the question, which is more or less like, a kind of looking at the complexity and how Kubestr is kind of.
Yeah, exactly. So I've already mentioned around, so storage benchmarking in Kubernetes is not a new thing. People have been able to run, like take the FIO example, people have been able to run flexible IO and build their own application and build their own pod and all of the YAML configuration files that go with that. Where Kubestr helps is, well, you don't have to have that. One, you don't have to have that skill set. And we're seeing a much faster adoption rate to people moving into this environment, into this platform. So they just want to hit the easy button to be able to really understand the storage that they're leveraging, understand the cost that they're leveraging, especially when it comes to the public cloud from a storage perspective, but being able to choose or have a much easier way to be able to identify, validate, and to evaluate that storage. And that's, so to the first point around, is it a collection of tools? Yes, it's absolutely a collection of tools. It's multi-platform. It's multi-platform in the way that regardless of where your Kubernetes cluster is, so we know that Kubernetes itself is very flexible and portable in itself, so it can run in various different locations. So Kubestr follows that. But also from the actual operator or the developer's point of view, It's also available on Mac OS, Linux, as well as Windows. It's a very easy download from GitHub. And as let's call it the first viable product or solution, I should say, is there's an intent from the community that will enable this to become a broader set of smaller tools that allow us to, again, hit the easy button when it comes to understanding what the storage options are within our clusters.
I also want to quickly talk about the governance and management of the project. Is it going to remain a Kasten's project, or are you planning to contribute it to some neutral foundation?
So I think we're just going to see how the contribution goes. Now, we believe that actually this is outside of what our normal data management storage backup type world, right? But we believe that it could be very useful to the public cloud providers, for service providers, for storage vendors that are developing their CSI driver or against the CSI driver. And then you start to build up a bigger contribution community to the product, to the project. What happens after that, I think it will be a case by case to understand. Like this is completely available, open source under a license on GitHub. Anyone could go and contribute to that. I think it's a wait and see, but it's not affiliated to. The only affiliation to Kasten is that we created it. There's nothing keeping that inside of Kasten.
And I think that's how most open source project, you don't start a project with governance. The reason you're doing a project is you saw a technical problem that you want to solve. And then, of course, based on the interest, feedback, then you decide, how do you want to manage the project? Right now, the focus is more on creating the project and getting people to use it. So I'm also curious, what kind of community are you trying to build around the project? By community, I mean user community or the community of people who are contributing. And how do you kind of encourage that contribution?
I think first and foremost, it's going to be the developer in this space that has had these challenges, the people that recognize that storage, especially if you're a developer that has come into the cloud native world and maybe storage has never been your thing. This is very much helping you get into understanding what capabilities are available there from a storage perspective. But then also those operators that are coming in from the other way, and maybe traditionally they're virtualization admins and they're traditionally storage admins, but they're not Kubernetes admins. They don't understand. So they've got that learning curve to go through. And we see that this project is going to meet in the middle and allow people to leverage it for whatever needs they have. Now, from a contribution point of view, like we mentioned, I believe that storage vendors will use this as part of their like day-to-day onboarding. You could see the new 2021 like speeds and feeds from a storage capability point of view that kind of disappeared because all storage is very, very much table stakes within the on-premise or on-premises or in the virtualization arena. But so yeah, would love to see how storage vendors bring their own tests, but then also around that validation is how does this look instead of having to walk the line and understand which cloud compute and which cloud storage to use, what about a group or what about a glossary of other people that have already walked that line, people that have already run those tests, and sharing that amongst the community so that you know that machine type A plus this type storage is going to give you this amount of IOPS based on this block size and all of the fundamentals of benchmarking. And I think that's an interesting pipe dream to see how this project goes. But I think, yeah, it's just a case of we need to get this out there so that people can use this handy little tool.
Right. And now I'll come back to the point of commercialization, because what happens with open source is that, as more, especially these days, when Kubernetes is especially kind of becoming mainstream, it's going in production. In the early days of Kubernetes, those early adopters, they were tech savvy companies. Now everybody is trying to use it, which also mean that they may not have all the technical, expertise internally. So they do need somebody to offer it, hey, you know what, you want to use this project, but you get it as a commercial offering. So does Kasten or Veeam has any kind of plans there? Of course, you mentioned vendors, there will be a booming ecosystem around that, but from your Kasten's perspective.
From a Kasten, if we're looking at Kasten K10 from a commercial point of view, there is only one element that this tool really helps, and it's the amount of customers or prospects out there that have a misconfigured CSI driver. So one element, that validation stage, that is what helps us. There is no reason to bring this into K10 unless it's just that element. And that will always be the element that stays out there from an open source perspective. If we incorporate that into the main key product, which we have no plans today to do, it obviously will still stay in that core community open source project available. And if we do enhance that, then we will enhance that branch so that everyone has the capability of being able to use that.
I mean, there is no question about it. We all know what Kasten is. So there's always an upstream project that you work on. But the problem that I see is that with open, and it's not, the problem is not the right word, but the beauty of open source is that, as I was saying earlier, anybody can take it. But then a user may need some extra functionalities. They want somebody else to manage it. They need somebody to take care of updates and upgrades. A new patch is coming in. Will it break my whole stack? So it does help when they have the option of, hey, you know what, this is a fully open source project, but it also has a commercial offering, so that I can, because when we look at open source, we also want to make sure that there is a commercial vendor behind it, so we can very easily move to that offering. So it does build, I think, confidence in the project. But at the same time, of course, you're absolutely right that the work is done on upstream. So I'm not saying that, if you do, it's not commercial versus open source. I always think commercial is a critical piece of sustainability of open source project. People don't understand that, but that is very critical.
Yeah, I think the backing of a company is the important part there, right? So yeah, this isn't we're going to drop it on GitHub and then leave it. Like, we know that our customers will benefit from this, and we know that there are many other customers, community that will benefit from this. So it's about, and people will want to contribute to this, whether it's like, one of the things that we're missing today is around like exporting from FIO a JSON. We've got the JSON output, but there's no graphical imagery of the output. Now that might be useful, but being able to take that JSON file and export that to something like Power BI, and then you start to get all of the JSON files out of all of the different storage testing, that opens up the door then to really give that visibility, fast visibility of what this is powerful, how this is powerful, and how this helps.
The project is just out there of the gates, but I want to understand a bit about, it's too early to talk about roadmap, but how is the release cadence going to look like? Are you going by point release it? Are you going to release when ready? Mostly open source project, hey, release when ready, but I just want to understand how does the release cycle going to look like?
So we've got engineers focused on this as well as their normal day job. But yeah, it will be, obviously, from a contribution point of view, and to begin with, it'll be our engineers checking that workload or that PR in. I don't think there's a set roadmap. We have some ideas about where this could potentially go. One of the visualization is up there with that. Then what about other tools as well around, like, so we've packaged FIO up into this automated container, as well as running the CSI check against your Kubernetes storage. But there's other options, and I'm sure there's other potential maybe smaller, maybe the same size, maybe bigger projects out there that could also be incorporated into this handy set of tools. And then you're not only making storage, like the storage admin or storage operators' life easier by having this all ready-made way of being able to do this, but now you're adding more value to it by adding additional capabilities into it.
Michael, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about not only this release of this open source project, but we also talked about the challenge that the cloud native community is facing when it comes to storage and how, bringing another open source project, Veeam and Kasten, you're kind of reinforcing the view that you're still committed to open source, which is great to see. And I look forward to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.